One, we're live on air on the Government Cheese Network. This is problematic. It's Sunday, 14th.
Yeah, so we're gonna start with current events then.
Sure, if you like, yeah, let's do that. Sure. Got some stuff in the chamber you want to bring up?
No, but I saw you added stuff.
Good. I wanted to. I was curious about your own problem stuff. Like, this week has been very interesting. A lot of first. Not that this president doesn't do a whole lot of firsts. Does.
Wait, hold on. Stop. Um, you're going in and out again.
In and out. All right.
Just use the Springy microphone. At least the Springy microphone didn't have all these other issues.
I'm doing it.
You're fading in and out. Ouch. Ouch.
Here I am on a different mic. How's that?
Much better.
All right. I'll lower the volume too because the volume is so high. To restart. I would say, or start beginning with current events. I was saying that this week.
Wait, hold on, I gotta start on my end first. Let's just start the whole thing over.
All right.
All right, hold on.
You want me to stop and do a new one, or actually, we'll just record and maybe edit some shit later.
Yeah, I could always just record it over here too.
Oh, okay. You want to do that?
Well, I was doing that.
Oh, okay. Let's start again. All right. 5, 4.
Wait, hold on. What the fuck? All right, go ahead.
Counting down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here we are on Sunday, October 14th, 2018, bringing you live from the Government Cheese Network, the Problematic Podcast with Low and Tone here, delivering you the goods in as controversial and sarcastic way as possible. And throwing up a hood sign while doing it. So yeah, we were gonna crack into some current events, I guess. But before we even get to that, how you doing, man? How's your week been?
Pretty crazy, man. I never know how to answer that question. Like, my week's been crazy. Fucking work's been fucking nuts. I ended up going off with my coworker last night or Friday night.
Was it
in front of all the patients, and it was all bad.
Was it deserved though?
No, it wasn't deserved at all. I'm a fucking asshole sometimes.
I try to think all of them say we have.
Yeah, that was my fault. I got sensitive over some bullshit and then got up in his face. I got hella loud, like through shit and everything.
Oh wow.
He was like, "Why are you getting loud?" I was like, "Cause I can, motherfucker. What the fuck you gonna do about it, bitch?" So yeah, that was
come out. You better be
not gonna do when you work at a rehab.
It's all right. You're rehabbing yourself, right? So to speak.
Yeah.
That's part of your rehab.
Wait, what was that? You cut out a little bit.
I said that's part of rehab is letting people have it. Getting the teeth instead of the tongue.
Yeah, but coworkers shouldn't be fighting in front of the patients. Supposed to leave your home at home. But yeah, I don't know. I'm a little fucked up in the head. I got to go take a vacation soon.
Oh yeah, that can be it right there. The lack of time away, time off.
Yeah, like a time off, haven't been taking care of myself. And when you work in an industry where all you do is deal with other people's problems, it's hard to have the energy to deal with your own. And it's fucking up. It's fucking me up. Even in my dreams, having fucked up dreams, all that shit. Nightmares.
Oh, so that's what was bringing around crazy dreams.
Not that specifically, but that's a big part of it.
I can relate to that. I know, like one of the I've only really had one recurring dream, which was they were kind of sequels to one another. But what I do have is recurring elements in dreams, normal from stress.
Yeah.
And one of the main ones for me is like my teeth, like losing my teeth, like a like just like when you're a kid, where you feel them loose in your mouth and you're playing with them with your tongue.
Yeah. So you're just in your dreams peeling out your teeth?
Kind of, yeah, like they're loose or whatever, and I'm like losing teeth all the time. And I notice that happens whenever I'm really like stressed, And part of that could be, which is my suspicion, is I'm probably grinding my teeth while I'm sleeping, or something to that effect, because I know I have the TMJ, and I've ground my teeth before.
Yeah, I was going to say, you would know if you grind your teeth because somebody would tell you. That shit is irritating. Hella loud. Sounds like somebody's chopping down trees in the forest.
Really?
I know because I used to grind my teeth and everybody used to tell me that.
No, I think my snoring is worse than any tooth grinding could possibly be.
Drowns it out and shit. Like, what the fuck is going on in there?
They hear me next door.
There's a rainforest in that room.
My snoring, I actually am pretty conscious to make sure I sleep in a way that I don't pronounced. But sometimes when you're just exhausted, you don't count on falling asleep, and you just fall like right there.
Yeah.
Nothing self-censoring or covering that out.
That's it too. Like fucking, I haven't been sleeping well either. I've been getting 2 hours of sleep at a time.
Yeah, that's how I came into today, man. I came into today. I'm not doing too well today. My week was okay, but today was not good. I don't know what it was. I really didn't eat anything controversial yesterday, but man, I had picked up some acid reflux at night, and then normally in acid reflux, it just hits you, because I ain't some old person with ulcers and shit. It is acid reflux hits you. You maybe take a Rolaids or some Tums or whatever, and then it's gone, right?
Yeah, it goes away in like 20 minutes an hour.
Yeah, that shit didn't happen. I've had it ever since then to right now, and it is uncomfortable, because needless to say, I just could not really sleep. Every time I get right to that point where you're relaxed enough to just totally go out, shit came back to haunt me. And so this is a new experience for me. I don't know precisely where it's coming from, but I guess I just got to be more cautious yet again. That's one of the.
That sucks. You didn't eat anything different?
Not really. I mean, I've had acid reflux before, and certain things that I shouldn't eat. Like I shouldn't eat really like hot, spicy stuff late at night, and particularly not like a lot of it. Like, so in other words, I would finish like a bowl of salsa, right? Something like that. Just a bad move.
Sometimes you just develop it. That happened with me with rum.
Oh.
I used to love drinking rum. Now, just like a sip will give me straight heartburn.
Interesting. I definitely need to think about that, because I forget. Oh yeah, like give you an example. I know one that really affects me is, and I have no problem with hot sauce normally. Like the actual, I'm not one of the dudes that's tripping because oh my god, it's so hot. No, not me. I'm like, hotter better, bring it. But I do know one that gets me, and I've always had it. This issue is buffalo sauce. Whatever it is, that form of hot sauce gets me. And
you're not missing out anyway.
And then the other one that is part of that I think is connected is vinegar. I'm always trying to not have vinegar on stuff, because the vinegar just doesn't settle with me. So like if you go to like Subway or Togo's or whatever, order a sandwich.
And you can't have no Filipino food.
I get like everything, and I always tell them like, but no vinegar. I'll take the oil, but not the vinegar. But yeah, the Filipino food, I eat the Filipino food, but I know some of them there's a dipping sauce that's made out of vinaigrette of some kind, and I try and avoid that too.
Well, they put vinegar in a lot of shit. I just made myself adobe last night.
Wow. Nice. Which reminds me of the conversation we had earlier in the week. It turns out that Lo and I have a mutual love for the culinary arts. We'll have to come back on this show one day and represent. We'll do a fucking cooking show for people. So we'll do our own special recipe or some shit.
I don't really have recipes.
You got that the flavored by hand moves. Nothing wrong with that. Some people don't.
So I got the let me look in my cabinet and see what's there.
Nothing wrong with that, man. I mean, I've been surprised by how many people don't know anything about cooking. So like I actually did a cooking, like a basic cooking lesson for a friend of mine, because dude lives off of like TV dinners. And I was like, dude, that's like no way to live. Microwavable shit all the time. And going, it's not that difficult. So I did some basic stuff like how do you clean the chicken? How do you prep, that sort of thing. And how do you choose it? And then how best to cook it, things like that. And yeah, no clue. You didn't even really know how to hold a knife.
I do that with a lot of my patients because a lot of them are very privileged young men who've never had to do anything for themselves. So yeah, when I see them just heating up shit or asking the older guys if they could cook them something, I'll just take them to the side and grab some shit and make them make something.
That's smart, man.
Like today, you're gonna learn how to cook stir fry. Here's all the shit. Chop it up. Throw it in there.
Yeah.
Learn by doing.
Yeah, mine has always been. I really learned by doing and watching at the foot of quite literally. Like a lot of my very early memories, like as a toddler, is sitting in the kitchen at my mom's feet, and my mom always made a point of including me in her cooking. In some way, shape, or form. Obviously, like when I was little, she wasn't making me do really hard stuff or do anything on the stove because I couldn't see the stove, right? But she would do things like, here, shuck this corn. I remember many times grinding meat by hand. And, or later as I got older, chopping stuff up. And then eventually that evolves in actually cooking. Can you handle this part, this part? And I'd already seen it so many times that I picked it up, the different techniques and things like that. And then the for lack of a better term, the kitchen wives' tales, which are just like the stuff that you wouldn't know unless someone told you.
Yeah.
And because it ain't in no cookbook, right? Like there's the one that always catches my attention, which I've seen a few times, is the spaghetti on the wall one.
Oh yeah.
like throw it against the wall. I'm like, what? I remember that when I first heard that. I'm like, throw it against the wall. Yes, throw it against the wall.
Spaghetti against the wall, oil in the water, boiling water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But all right, moving on to, I guess, the news and current events. What I was wanted to hit was this was a week of firsts, and it seems like we're always getting firsts anyway, thanks to Trump. Like dude does some crazy shit every fucking day, and previously is one day crazier than before. The difference is that there's been some firsts that are of like global significance, and even his reaction to them. The big news story this week has been about the embassy in the Saudi embassy in Turkey. Have you heard about that?
A little bit.
Basically, there was a journalist, a Saudi journalist who had been living in exile. He'd actually was kind of forced out of the country. And he was living actually at that moment in time, he happened to be living in Turkey, but he typically actually is a resident alien here in the United States. He's a U.S. resident, and so he had met a woman, obviously, and he decided to get married. And so he was going to get a marriage license, kind of simple thing, in the at the Saudi embassy, and they told him to come back in a week or a day or whatever it was. In he's in Turkey, right? And so
Mhm.
he shows up the next day with his wife, and he leaves the wife in the car because he figures it's not going to take that much time, right? And so he goes in, and he never comes back out. And his wife actually ends up waiting out there deep into the evening, almost into the next day. And then immediately thereafterward, she goes to Turkish officials and says, "I believe my husband has been kidnapped and held hostage." As it turned out, and the story developed, is basically they disappeared him, and the Saudi elements the working for members of the Saudi royal family had set in motion a conspiracy to basically kidnap, torture, imprison, and murder this journalist. And so that creates there's a variety of things creating an international outroar at this uproar at this. And so in the investigation, which is ongoing, the preliminary investigation by the Turks actually got an insider from the embassy to give them the skinny about what happened, and informed the Turkish investigators that there's actually video. And so it turns out that when he originally visited the embassy, I guess he was persona non grata, obviously, because he criticized the government. He was living in exile. They arranged it so that he could come back another day so they could set him up for what was about to happen. And then they brought in specialists uh, from the intelligence and the military to deal with him. And so what it appears occurred was they immediately seized him upon his second visit and then put him into like really torturous interrogation. And then in the at some point within that, they murdered him. And then they dismembered his body and most likely took him out under diplomatic cover, probably like pieces in suitcases and shit like that, because a lot of the same people that came into the country also left. And so and all of this is on video. And according to the informant, it is a truly horrific video. You can hear him screaming. You can see everything. It's all there. And the international reaction is manifold. For one, you're getting it from the journalist community, the community of like, wait a minute, like where is the freedom for journalists? I see the outcry of that and the validity of that, but by the same token, it's like you're a journalist in a totalitarian country. What the fuck did you think was going to happen? You have to expect some form of repression and not expect, that there's some kind of universal observation and freedom that journalists have, which they don't. And so, in that regard, I'm not surprised that they went after or oppressed him. But the second part of it was, which is much more major, and the UN came out and took a position on this because many countries have now suspended their diplomatic envoys and relations with the Saudi government as a result of this, because it violates the sanctity of the sovereign territorial process and what they call it, embassy politics, essentially. Because even though stuff like this most likely has always happened, it is done in a discreet enough way that it's deniable. This one wasn't deniable, which is a problem. And then the other scary part of it is, in actuality, what they did is completely legal. Because once he steps across the threshold, he actually is no longer in Turkey. He's in Saudi Arabia, right? That's the whole premise of it. So in any event, as it comes to the U.S., the controversy is like wildfire is going through the UN, and to the point where the Secretary General of the UN is bringing it up as a human rights violation, and that there needs rights investigation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so the question comes to Donald Trump as to whether or not we are going to suspend some of our support, namely military weapons, selling them to it. And this is where it got interesting. Donald Trump's response was, "Oh, this is horrendous. What happened? We need to investigate it, and we are investigating it." He goes, "But I'm not going to suspend any of the arms deals that we have with them." He goes, "What's the point of the U.S. losing 180 billion dollars when the second we do it, they're just going to go over to the Russians or the Chinese and get it there." The intriguing thing to me is Saudi Arabia was at the top of his rhetoric list of like people that we shouldn't be doing business with. That was his claim during his campaign, right? We shouldn't be doing terrorists and all that shit. And yet he actually says, no, we need to preserve the business with these people. And so that has become a very controversial topic in terms of why he won't make the move, which is unfortunate, that liberal progressive thing, that they're expecting him to be basically to value life, which is kind of a ridiculous notion. But that's the main one. I assume I filmed in some details you probably hadn't heard.
Yeah. I don't get why that dude was so important though. Why did they kill him?
He was critical of the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, and I guess had been really reporting on stories they didn't want reported on. So for example, some of the
Well, was he still doing this in Turkey?
Oh yeah, he was an international commentator still, but he was also a very real journalist that reported on other stuff besides Saudi Arabia. He reported on normal stuff. Like he would report on Middle East and Syria and stuff like that. Because Turkey is also one of it is the regional. Istanbul specifically is a regional hub for media, for international media. So you actually have like East Asian, South Asian, Near Eastern, and European. What do they call them? News stations, I guess you would call there's another word for it. Basically, bureaus. That's the word. They have the bureaus, like international bureaus there that cover entire regions. So him working from there made perfect sense. And I left something out. He was working for the Times as one of his major employers. So it was New York. One of the reasons it made such news in the U.S. because otherwise it would be like, why would someone care about an Arab journalist, right? That's just random. But it turns out that he was a correspondent for the New York Times. And the Times, of course, is the paper of record for the U.S. government, or the U.S., I should say, not the U.S. government. But yeah, I mean, obviously it was personal because from what I've read, nothing he did was that bad that he deserved.
Yeah, it sounds extra petty to me.
Yeah, exactly. Especially with how graphic, it was. I mean, you're gonna chop the guy up and shit. Video.
Yeah.
I mean, why torture him? Because he's not like a spy. What are you gonna get from him from torture? Nothing. He's probably not gonna apologize, and even if he's gonna apologize for what, who knows? You're gonna kill him anyway. So it's like, really, there's a what do they call it? A sadism in needing to see that video, right? Because someone obviously it wasn't just being recorded by default. It was probably being live streamed or some shit to someone that put this ball in motion. And so we're going to see more about this. I actually think it's going to have a very wide trickle-down effect. There had been a very similar incident about a decade ago, I think it was, in the sense of like how international relations got violated which was when they killed some of the leadership of Hamas, the Israelis did. And
Yeah.
So that made international news. And the other intriguing part is this is the kind of shit that, ends up in spy movies and shit like that. But now in the era of immediate news cycles, the shit goes public. You just can't do that shit the same way anymore, Just I'm gonna do some crazy shit and no one's ever gonna see it. No, like within 24 hours, they already kind of had known the story, and there was already people organizing and agitating, and it wasn't something that falls on deaf and blind ears. The other first is smaller, but more relevant to the U.S., which is about Kavanaugh, the confirmed justice to the U.S. Supreme Court. Is he actually entered into the job? I think it was Monday. Was his first day at work. But he also is the only Supreme Court justice ever to enter into the job while under investigation, because a group of various organizations and bar organizations, lawyers and stuff like that, filed against him in federal court, that he had been in violation of a wide variety of things, like in terms of character and his obligation and stuff like that as a federal justice. And so the basic underlying premise of that is if it's proven out, it would have said that he was disqualified from being a federal justice, and actually they had grounds to remove him from office. And so now this has become a big issue because no one has ever entered into the Supreme Court with this trailing behind them, because it's not resolved yet. It's in process. And then the second thing is, if as a member of the U.S. Supreme Court, do they even have the jurisdiction to file? And if they do have the jurisdiction to file, who rules on it? Because like the federal court might exclude itself by coming due to conflict of interest. But if it removes itself, then it actually would probably typically go up to the Supreme Court, which means he would rule on himself.
There has to be something against that. He would have to dismiss himself from the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he probably would, but we'll see. I mean, it's like I said, it's a first. These things have never occurred before, and we're in the slow molasses roll of bureaucratic politicking, but it is happening little by little by little. And in the meantime, Trump's hordes become ever more emboldened and also ever more ridiculous. Moving on. That was it for my at least my updates. The other ones would be like if we want to talk about the fights.
Yeah, fill me in because I didn't watch them.
Oh, you didn't get to watch? Well, I was actually really curious because I was less. We don't really watch Bellator that often. I decided to check out Bellator just because it was the main event was Charles Sonnen versus
Fedor Emelianenko.
And on paper that looks interesting. Not that I ever thought Sonnen never had a chance, but I'm always game to watch Fedor fight. Even if it is past his prime.
Well, the only reason why it interested me a little bit was because I just wanted to see Sonnen get his ass kicked. Fucking hate that dude.
I don't like his personality either. He's so fucking full of himself, and fuck that American gangster bullshit. That's audacious as fuck to use that term.
He's been using it for a while. I was part of his whole trolling against the Brazilians when he was in the UFC.
Even so, it's just ridiculous. A totally ridiculous concept when applied to that. Because he has that. I mean, it's also in contradiction to the way he actually acts. His kind of his stilo is actually a self-righteous prick. He always comes across as self-righteous in relationship to any other fighter or analyst or broadcaster. You know, like, I'm right. This is what should happen. This is what's really going on. And this is how you should be.
I think it's all just personas. We haven't really seen the real Chill yet, because when he was in the UFC, he was just a straight up shit talker. The self-righteous shit came later on once he retired or semi-retired and became, an analyst and started the whole podcasting that he has now. But he's always been a bitch. He's always talked that shit. And he's always been a racist fuck. And a cheat. Fucking steroid user. Fucking bitch.
Because wasn't he was actually suspended for steroids, right?
Yeah, that was when he fought Anderson Silva.
And he's so fucking duplicitous about that shit.
Yeah, he tested high for testosterone. That was back in the fucking PRT days. Or TRT days. PRP.
But in any event, like I said, we don't really watch Bellator that often. I just was really interested because of it was this is probably a bad use of the term, but I thought of it as a novelty act or a novelty match, you know? I was like, okay. The throwback. And to Fedora's credit, Fedor looked pretty goddamn good. And fuck, that guy's strong. Because there's a couple moments in the where he literally is tossing Chell around like a rag doll.
Yeah.
Like for real tossing him. And I was like, holy shit. I was like, that's a strong motherfucker right there. Like, you're just picking a grown ass. Toss you over there. Yeah, toss you over here. And he wasn't winded at all. It's not like it showed effort on Fedor's part, you know? It was just like, whatever. And then Chell did come in with some preparation. He did kind of shoot at him a few different times, a few different ways. The problem was you can use as much technique as you want. You could be faster than the other guy, but if he is like an iron horse that can't be moved, just so rooted in the ground that you don't affect him when you hit him. And I'm not even talking about fists. I'm talking about like even when you slam into him, then you have a problem, and that's pretty much what was happening, because the couple times where he actually did get Fedor down, not only did Fedor either escape it, turn it around, or whatever, it really only happened because he happened to catch Fedor off balance at a particular moment. But whenever Fedor was just normal, he couldn't get him off his feet,
That is not surprising. Chill has no business fighting at heavyweight.
Yeah. Well, that was money grab, and this is their
fucking middleweight.
This is their whole plan, right? They're trying to build a new. They're trying to reinvigorate the Bellator franchise.
Yeah, and Fedor really needed to win. Yeah, and that was a good opponent for him to look very good in, or very good against, and we'll see what happens next. Fedor, I love Fedor. It's just his chin is gone.
Yeah, and they actually brought that up in the commentators were like, oh yeah, his chin, not what it used to be. He's been knocked out a few times. And I was like, damn. But you never know. Sometimes you can compensate for your chin.
He's still dangerous. He just needs to tighten up on his offense a little bit.
But actually, I didn't bring up fighting because of them. Because to be honest, in the end, I really only caught, I think, four of five, and I wouldn't even say 4 or 5, like 2, like 3/4 of the title matches were all really short, like first round type shit. And but I was actually really interested in the boxing match that you said you watched, or did you miss that?
Yeah. Well, I ended up watching it this morning when I woke up.
Oh, right.
Fucking, Crawford against Jose Benavidez for the WBO welterweight title. It was basically how I thought it would go. Crawford schooled him for 12 rounds and knocked him out last second in the 12th.
Like he was biding his time?
Well, Jose Benavidez, he's no chump. But he's just not on that level. He was waiting too long. He was trying to pot shot, only throwing, one hand at a time. That's not enough against Crawford. Crawford established that jab early on and just started putting on a beating. Took him out to the body early, tired him out, and just had his way with him for the whole fight.
That was that. You just
Yeah. Poor Jose Benavidez. He had potential before the injury. He tore his ACL, hasn't really been the same since. But his brother's killing it. They're both from Phoenix too.
oh, that's nice. They still
Yeah.
train out there, or have they moved their camp to someplace else?
No, they train out of Phoenix. Some local celebrities. On the undercard, Stevenson knocked out his opponent. I'm not even going to say that dude's name because he got embarrassed. That was a first round beatdown. Fucking 9-0 for Stevenson. Good young up and comer to watch. Good fundamentals, good power. Not that fast. But he murdered that dude last night. Fucking knocked him down a couple times.
Well, this came to a head.
Yeah, straight combination punches. Beautiful.
Well, I know you love those the fights where technique wins out, or just straight skill, I should say, wins out.
Yeah, I like the chess matches. I like the fights that everybody says are boring.
Or
But yeah, good win for Crawford. He kind of dodged the question of who he wants next. Which I hate when fighters do that. Oh, I'm just, that's not up to me. I'm going to leave that up to my manager and promoters. And I'll fight whoever they put in front of me. Shut the fuck up. You're in the most stacked division in boxing that we've seen in a long ass time. You need to start calling out the big names.
it could be that he is. He's been prone. He's been called, not called. Grown accustomed to that. Very possible.
Yeah, that could be it. But still, I mean, there's Spence there, there's Sermon there. You still have Porter there. You need to start calling them out. You need to start fighting them. And Crawford's good. I put him over most of those guys. But he needs to take the fights. No more Jose Benavidez's.
Beneath you.
Yeah. Let's get some real fucking competition in there.
So then what's coming up next in the fight that we should all be looking forward to?
Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder for the heavyweight strap.
Speaking of which, did you recently shared a story on social media? Was that Wilder broke someone's jaw?
Yeah, that was some Spanish language channel. I don't know what the fuck was going on because I don't speak Spanish, but for some reason they brought out a mascot and thought it would be a good idea if Wilder punched him in the mouth. This dude, like I said on the caption, he's 40-0 with 39 knockouts. Most of those knockouts came within 3 rounds. I don't care. That little padding isn't enough. So I guess he ended up breaking the guy's jaw.
It may have been he misunderstood. Like they wanted a toy swing on the do a fake swing on the mascot outfit, right? And touch the.
It could have been. They thought he was going to pull his punches. He's like, nah. Boom.
That's gonna be the audacity.
The funniest thing, though, if you watch the video, is that they don't cut away. They just play it off.
Like, oh well.
They're like, oh, it's okay, it's okay. The guys just they just go on with the segment. It's like, man, Spanish TV is crazy. I need to watch this shit more often.
Man, has he had a comment on it yet? Like, it's not something that's going to come up in some kind of review, is it?
No one. He hasn't commented on it. No one's asked him about it.
Nice. Right?
That article is the only thing I've seen on it. I was like, shit is ridiculous. Somebody should be fired. That's crazy. I hope that mascot got paid money.
That's a good question.
There's professional boxers that did just as well, who got paid pretty good.
Well, I know in other news was the preliminary ruling came down on the Khabib fight, the Khabib McGregor fight.
Yeah.
You heard about that? Like, so both of them are suspended at present?
Yeah. They didn't say how long, right?
No, they haven't said how long. My guess is it'll come out this week.
I imagine sometimes they don't really say at all. But I imagine if we take boxing as precedent, particularly the Roger Mayweather situation and the Judah fight, and the situation with Tyson and Holyfield, that he will be suspended for a year.
Well, but it's suspended both of them. So you think both will be suspended? Or
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, because I have a feeling if they suspended only Khabib, it would be a real problem. But it isn't even gonna. It just. But it's not nationwide, right? This is just for Nevada.
No, it's nationwide.
Oh, so it's a nationwide.
Yeah, it's not worldwide though, so I'm sure Khabib could probably find some burners in Russia between then. McGregor too, probably in Ireland. I doubt McGregor would get suspended as long though. I wouldn't be surprised if they give him a little less, like 6 months.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me either, considering according to him, he'd already paid his dues when it came to the bus incident, and then for all intents and purposes,
well, not really. You should have got suspended for that.
That's true. This could be maybe posthumous, ideally a posthumous suspension with any.
And that bus incident wasn't even the only shit like that McGregor's pulled. He fucking did that shit in Bellator, jumped over the fence and caused a big fucking scene.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a dick. But we'll see. And if he does get suspended for 6 months, that gives him enough time to get a match in, a tune-up, and another 6 months to train and get ready for the rematch.
Assuming they go there right away, I really kind of hope Khabib doesn't. Like, I'm just because I'm sick of McGregor. Fuck him. I'd rather see Khabib take on some other folk, and they get their chance to do whatever it is that they feel they need to do. Try and get that title, than to constantly rehash, Dana White's favorite white boy.
I don't know. If I was Khabib, I would get that money.
Which I understand. I'm just saying as a fan of the sport, I don't want to see them fight again. Not right away. I'd like to see them fight maybe 2 or 3 fights down the line. And I think that would be, I'd prefer that on both their parts. I could stand to see McGregor fight one more time before Khabib. But Khabib, I'd like to see him do 2 to 3 defenses before he gets to McGregor again. That would be cool in my book.
Who's there for him to fight?
Not many.
Beat everyone already. Everyone worth mentioning.
But it's it's a young division, relatively speaking, compared to some of the other divisions which are not aging gracefully.
Ferguson is like the only fight I would like to see with Khabib. That's intriguing at this point.
That you'd want to spend time to pay attention to.
What's up?
I feel I said that you want to spend any time paying attention to.
Yeah. I kind of want to see the rematch. I want to see him destroy fucking McGregor again, take that money, and then that's it. That's the end for McGregor.
That's true, because that would be what, 3 in a row, roughly.
Well, if you count the Mayweather fight,
Oh yeah.
then it's 3 in a row. But no, it'd be 2 in a row. I'd even do it again. Like, all right, third time. Second time wasn't enough. Here's the third time. Bam! Now everyone shut the fuck up. I'm the king here.
And then hang it up. Be like, I'm done.
Yeah, I love. I like McGregor. I do not like McGregor's fans. So I love every time he loses because just the tears. The tears start pouring in.
Not just the tears, the excuses. Oh, it might as well. Be, oh yeah, he had lint in his eye. That's why he lost. The butterfly effect. A drop fell on a leaf on the other side of the world, and somehow that affected McGregor's ability to not knock him out that day. Like, come on, man.
Yeah, they're delusional.
Some of that I think just is part of the MAGA stuff, dude. McGregor's style totally fits. His marketability fits that entire kind of pump-ish ethos, this kind of alpha male bullshit. Because he has a different vibe, if you know, like in the European fans, his European fans are different. They're more typical of just general European fans, But the people here are a whole other thing.
I don't know.
But the other news that came out was Khabib's coach being an informant.
Yeah, well, that's been like out of for a while. That's what McGregor fans troll Khabib with all the time. No, your manager's a terrorist. All that bullshit. But I mean, it kind of is. And a fucking snitch.
Right. The Russians do not play.
Yeah, this dude's no joke.
Moving on. Let's see what's next on our agenda. Actually, I'll let you handle that. Where do you want to go next on our?
Oh, the culture stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Culture and authenticity. Yeah, I just wanted to start incorporating more indigenous stuff into this podcast. I mean, we are indigenous. We should probably start talking about shit that affects our communities.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, culture and authenticity, that kind of came up in a conversation with a mutual friend of ours.
Sometimes guest.
Yeah. He was talking about the no, not Junior.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes guest. No, not Junior. It was I'll just say his fucking name. It was Ernesto.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Are you starting to remember our conversation now?
Yes, he has not been a guest on this show yet, but he will be. That I sure. Referring to Ernesto Vigil, author of Chicano Militancy and the FBI, I think is what it's called. Or the Crusade for Justice, Chicano Militancy and the FBI. That's what it's called.
Yes, sir. Yeah, but he was just talking about we talked about it a couple of times, but just indigenismo, like the lack of principles in these cultural spaces.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that usually comes up from shit that you'll find out in his upcoming book. Stay tuned. Has to do with snitches and shit from that period.
It also has to do with, like, we've seen it today, because I remember, like, for example, when I first came out to Arizona, one of the things, I think it was the first time, might have been the second time I came out, but I remember I ended up kind of having to mediate exactly an issue around authenticity and the lack of kind of consideration, in part because it came from the Chicano indigenous clique if you will, and their traditions. And by traditions, I'm not talking about traditions in the traditional, native ritualistic sense. What I mean is the bad habits that they've incorporated and called traditions. And I remember very specifically hearing from Tohono as well as some of the Dene, and I believe the Hopi, but really primarily Tohono about how kind of the smudging rituals, which usually is the smudging rituals, but burning copal and sage, which is not a universal thing at all in indigenous culture. It's a very unique and culturally and tribally specific, some of it, or regionally specific, was imposing itself within spaces where they were trying to meet and cooperate. So the basic example, I'll just be really brief. The basic example was, meeting in a hogam or whatever the space was. I don't remember the exact space. And you have elders and small children. And then you have this, these people that are kind of obsessed with the spectacle of the ritual of their of their cultural authenticity, the lack of cultural authenticity actually, and filling up the room with smoke and everyone coughing and wheezing, as opposed to actually being considerate of the people there and abiding by their versus your own impositional. Very American,
Right.
and and I remember that was volatile, because there was clear fuck scenarios of the younger crowd of like, yeah, we don't talk to those people. That's because they do X, Y, and Z, and I couldn't blame them. We're right.
But did anybody talk to them?
To the elders, so to speak, the Chicano or indigenous elders.
Yes.
Yeah, I had some conversations with them, and then there was conversations amongst themselves, and it became clear that the major perpetrators were not going to change their ways.
But did the tribal members have a conversation with them?
From what I gathered, not really, because one of the problems with that is the inversion of that of actual observing cultural tradition and habits that are authentic. Because one of the things that occurs is you're never gonna if you're acting in a traditional manner for the most part in northern nations, and actually Central American and Southern nations, you are never going to put someone in a position that would make them seem dishonorable. So in other words, that wouldn't be a public thing. That makes sense? Privately, you might talk to them about that on the side, and it would never make it into the public sphere, right? So the only place that actually really got volatilely discussed or confronted was amongst the younger crowd, right? But it wasn't really discussed at the highest levels, as far as I know.
Yeah, that's a problem at the elders level.
And it's an interesting a culture clash too, because one is trying to be well mannered, and in their form of being well mannered, it opens themselves up, for lack of a better term, to be abused and have to suffer someone else's impositions. Does that make sense? And then the other one never hears what they're doing wrong, right? And because they won't be embarrassed. But in my own experience, what I've never understood, and this is where Americanism penetrates indigenous space and native communities, is in the notion of presumption, right? Like there's always one of the underlying elements of Americanism, aside from individuality and individualism, is a sense of entitlement. And so that sense of entitlement becomes part of how they manifest their traditions. Like, I'm here, so therefore I'm going to impose myself. And then I'm going to back that up by claiming this is representative of my culture and tradition and whatever. And the reality is, after a certain amount of time, you do that shit enough, and enough people do that shit, guess what? That is your fucking tradition. It's fucked up. But I actually say that's through the prism of fucking colonialism. That's you bringing. You're not decolonized enough to not have an American attitude about, you know, your performance of ritual, and that's the sad part because it's just performance. Because clearly the heart is missing if you're not doing, if your intention is off, or there's other elements that are part of that intention that have nothing to do with actually maintaining good relations, but are about like prideful imposition.
Right. I think that is individualism, man. Because you're acting on the self. There's really no other reason.
Well, I would go
There's
beyond.
really no other motivation behind it except for some ego bullshit. But there's also another thing that's very American that seems to go across all fucking cultures here. Is I don't know where people got this idea that their opinion fucking matters. You got to earn your fucking space. You got to earn your spot in that space. You got to earn your voice. You don't just come in and start saying shit. And also this whole fucking notion of peace and not bothering people and accommodating everybody. Where the fuck did that come from?
And that, well,
When you travel with respect. You ask permission before you do that shit.
and that's the key word right there, respect. It isn't about peace, and it isn't about being cooperative in the sense that people like become unprincipled in doing so. It is about just respect, an informed form of respect by going into spaces, being humble enough to not yourself, but to be open to learn what is respectful in that space. Just checking yourself may not be enough. It could be as simple as mistakes in dress or how you address someone, you know. And this applies beyond the indigenous sphere, right? But it's clearly a an analogous example going along the lines of what you're saying about earning your opinion is amongst the Haudenosaunee and the Iroquois, the Six Nations. In the past, and to some degree now, the only people that had a voice in voting, because it was democratic. That's where the U.S. government gets supposedly gets their entire notion of Democratic Republican. The only people that could vote, and it was a matriarchy also, were mothers and grandmothers. Basically, you had to have children because otherwise you really didn't have you weren't an adult. You didn't, they actually acknowledged that there was something beyond just your opinion of things. There's something experiential matters and is fundamental to this that it makes quantitatively and qualitatively different than the other people because you have an experience that is not shared by them, if that makes sense. And variations on that, not necessarily specifically about child rearing, but variations on these kind of details exist in every single native culture, but they get ignored by, like you said, that this the individualist Americanist notion. And I say Americanist because it does at a certain point goes beyond the individual. Because here's the sad truth: like when we're dealing with the folk, I'm assuming part of what was being discussed with Ernesto was we can't not talk about some of the groupings and communities that we deal with. So like the indigenous Chicanos, if you will, or the self-appointed Aztecs. What happens is they're using such a hodgepodge way of learning culture and what is authentic that if enough people start doing individualist shit and it becomes habitualized across the board, it's no longer individual because that's actually what they're being taught. Like masses of people are being taught that, right? And that's the only difference. That's when I say it's like Americanism, because that's an American habit too, right? That's the whole shit like that. What was that video? We may have talked about it. Was the guy in I think it was in Nigeria or Kenya. Remember the white guy that actually swung on the
oh yeah
hotel guy?
Yeah.
Man, he had a fucking an intense view of his fucking self-importance. That's for goddamn sure. But
Yeah, I forgot all the racist shit he was saying, but that was crazy.
what was the context that your conversation with Ernesto elaborated upon?
Well, I can't because it has to do with his book.
Okay. Oh, I thought it was more general in the sense of like interactions and stuff like that. Because I know his book because I was a researcher and to a lesser degree one of the contributing editors on his book. But I definitely was a researcher. I did a shit ton of research for that book. And there definitely is one question of authenticity which we can openly discuss, which is how faux authenticity, or just really the costume is dress up and give validation to someone's voice, right?
Right.
There's a peer of ours, for example, and I don't know if we talked about this. Maybe I think we did. But there's a peer of ours that probably also be a guest on here at some point in the near future. Danae, brother, and him and I have discussions quite literally where I'm like, dude, use you know, particularly around like these white people and also the people that have identity issues, because he has an aesthetic to him, right? That is like, we'll say is quintessentially native. And I've noticed inevitably when he's in a certain space, everyone kind of shuts up like, oh, the authentic Indian is talking. It must be wisdom coming out of his mouth, you know, like, and I'm like, dude, play into that, you know, fuck with their heads, make them, you know, here's some shit because they're not fucking listening to other people say the exact thing. You know?
Yeah, the aesthetic is a part that really bothers me.
Do you think that's fading out, or do you see in your own community that that's becoming a thing as well? Like,
It's not a thing in my community at all. But when working with natives and with the indigenismo crowd, it was always an issue. You know, I'm not indigenous because I don't wear an ear and speak in flowery prose. Like, come on, man.
yeah, that's like me because I fucking swear so much.
No, they just always viewed me as like, you know, some lost guy that was trying to find himself through this indigenous culture. But it was like, no, no,
Like, I
no.
know who I
Yeah.
am. Yeah, that's growing. Sadly, I mean, and, this became a big issue at Standing Rock behind the scenes. Was it became a point of pilgrimage, not just because of protest and action, and I really would say like nostalgia, like American sense of uh, melancholy nostalgia. This idea of like whatever, but in reality, on the ground in the encampments, I heard I heard feedback again and again and again and again about how there was these young people that, you know, were born again Indian, you know, and that is outside of the new age white people, white dread Indians, you know, like there was a lot of those too. But what saddened me, I'm like, fucking hey, man, it's been 50 years. You know, the 1970s was the, you know, the Red Power movement. You're telling me even today, you know, you're so goddamn lost. You have no sense of who you are. And it isn't necessarily even native. It's like they don't even know anything about being Mexican or being Chicano or any of this stuff. And I'm like, how the fuck did that, like, how did it demographically not shrink? And in fact, it's still like, you know, present.
Well, why would it shrink?
Well, I think for one, before there was no institutional intervention. So, for example, that the 70s brought about a renaissance, if you will, borrowing that term, obviously, an indigenous renaissance. So, where traditions and ceremonies and stuff like that had been outlawed, now they were no longer outlawed. You had money funding to build institutions. You had revitalization of ceremonial tradition, of history, of a lot of stuff that's legit. It is not like fake. And not only that, it's been alive for 40 years, right? And so the excuse that you were just hiding, just trying to, there was no outlet for you, you didn't even know what Indian was, kind of thing, is no longer legitimate. It's ever present and it's there to be had if someone so chooses. So then, how did you miss out? Because these are not people that like, these are not people from my generation, because I overlap with that generation, right? So I can actually say there's a point in my life where maybe some of those institutions didn't exist, or they were few and far between. This new generation of, we'll just use the millennial crowd as an example, have been raised on the internet. There's a million videos, there's a million ways of contacting people that you can get involved and learn something about yourself. And instead, it becomes cartoon, like your own personal cartoon of figuring out who you are and how to be. And then that becomes, like you said, it's entitled. Their their opinion and their version.
Yeah, that was a big problem at DQ University.
In terms of what the history of DQ, or just how intertribal people interacted, or
Just how people interacted, how the the occupiers interacted, particularly this group from LA, this Metro group from LA. They came down very like, new age. I just found my indigenous roots type of people who were up there trying to teach not only the other occupiers about what it means to be indigenous, but the elders, the spiritual elders too.
And this was coming out of college, I'm assuming too.
Yeah, this is coming out of some college aged fucking 22-year-old. Still doesn't know how to wipe his ass right correctly, fucking trying to teach some spiritual elder how to be native. And that's because they were over there fucking around on sacred grounds trying to do their own ceremony, which was completely made up, make believe, fucking quote unquote Mayan ceremony. They were told that they couldn't do that there, that it was disruptive, and it was disruptive to the sweat that's been running ever since DQ opened. And they were told to move, and they said no. Indigenous people didn't believe in ownership. Did that shit just come out of your mouth to an elder? Slap the shit out of you, son.
Oh man, that reminds me of a story or an anecdote that Ernesto talked about at an event where I forget if he was. I think he was invited, but he wasn't. He wasn't like the key speaker on the indigenous side of things. He was invited as some different kind of commentary. But in any event, he was describing the opening of the event and how there was this circle, and then how the self-appointed indigenous, the Chicano appointing himself indigenous, started talking and actually describing what was essentially what a Dene is and how Dene tradition works, and going on and on and on in the square. And Ernesto was telling me, he goes, what's so sad about it is standing right next to him are three in Dene elders. They tell me they can't speak for themselves.
Yeah.
He goes, I was fuming, but I have respect enough to know that it's not my place to get angry. Not there, because he knows interacting with elders in and of itself and how that works. He goes, he's so freaking oblivious that he's even talking over them, and they're being so gracious that they're not blowing their top, versus someone like you or me or our friend Ernesto probably would blow our tops, even if it's behind the scenes. We'd be like, what the fuck?
Yeah, I'd be like, hey, you gotta get the fuck out of here. Well, my shit wasn't behind the scenes. My shit's out there for everybody to see.
Yeah, that's true.
But
that was well deserved. Like I remember when that shit came out. Not the shit against you, I mean, but in the aftermath of what happened when you threw them out of the Arbor, or was it Arbor? I don't forget what Arbor.
Kind of. They used it as like a roundhouse back in the day, but I don't think that's what it originally was.
We'll just say out of the ceremonial space. When you threw
Yeah.
them out of the ceremonial space, immediately, aside from pissing and moaning, this guy predicated everything about himself. About look at me, I'm native. Look at me, I'm native. Look at me, I'm native. You know, I did this, I do that, I do this, I do that. And I straight up, I've been through scenarios like that myself. And straight up, guess what? Indigenous people don't ever have to fucking prove what they are. You know, if you're spending so much goddamn time trying to show that you have some kind of patents about who you are, you know, then clearly you're insecure about who you are.
Yeah, and here's the thing, like it transcends the whole just the Chicano thing, because that whole situation was not just Chicanos, but there was fucking people from Rapitan Rancheria involved. There were fucking, Lakotas involved.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
All these people that this one Chicano elder fucking brought together to, under his banner. He called the banners and shit. And all these indigenous people descended on DQ.
Anyone out there that's worthy of a award, bringing in the Game of Thrones on real shit. I like it.
But yeah, so all these natives came in to confront me at the DQ fucking 40th anniversary powwow. A powwow I helped organize. Thank you very much. But they all descended to confront me to see if I should be, kicked out. And the Black Beret Elders, the organization that I was a part of, they were there too. Mm-hmm. And we had this big little meeting out in the parking lot. Smoked a peace pipe. Made a little pact that nothing, was going to be said after that. Came to an understanding that all parties will stay, and that we just all gotta get along a little better.
Before the record, that other side did not do that. They fucking broke that shit within a day.
Yeah, well, that's what I was gonna say. He broke that shit right after.
Mm-hmm.
And me, I had to keep my fucking part of the deal.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's just how I was raised. That's what the elders said I should do. And, I'm not going to go against the elders. That was the whole reason for the thing, was me standing up for the elders against these fake ass motherfuckers who don't know shit from shit.
And for the record, for those that, like, anyone that hears this in the future or now, whatever, I know for a fact that Lo did exactly that, because I talked to him before, during, somewhat, right, and after. You did something which was intriguing, which is I knew all the inside information. We talked about a lot of it. But you actually consciously were like, no, I don't want to talk about it. And even if I would inquire in questions and stuff like that, you were kind of like, for a period there, you were just like, no, I said I wouldn't talk about it, so I'm not going to talk about it. And I was like, fair enough, But you did that for, I would say, for at least a good 3 years. You really didn't say anything, and you were observing it. And
yeah, I did it until it became clear that it was no longer an issue for me to talk about it.
Yeah, and then at this stage, it isn't. Even the way you talk about it, breaking ranks at all, And then I've had the same.
I'm not giving names, right? If you were there, you know who I'm talking about. But if you were there, you know what happened anyway.
Yeah, exactly. See, that's a level of respect that the other side doesn't even have. And then the sad part is like I said, this is not a unique encounter. We've had this same encounter so many fucking times. Where what I would call, pretendians from the wannabe tribe need to just, they can't not be their fucking toxic individualist selves, because for them it's just a costume. That's really what it is.
It is.
And it's a sense of like they wrap up their identity, which isn't even really their identity, it's their hustle, in with it. And then they're gonna always rock that because that's all that they can do, which has nothing to do with the reality of the actual struggles and daily life, not even like the oppression or crazy radicalism, just daily life of actual Native people. You know, we can say that on some level they are quasi-Native because they've been acculturated and colonized and oppressed, whatever. But the fact of the matter is, they're definitely not what they're trying to represent. They're representing a fake version of it. That's just like I said, costume. That shit drives me nuts.
Yeah, it's very much a costume. But the thing, all right, like these people are here, and we have to deal with them.
Yeah.
But my question is does authenticity really matter, right? Like it has to be more important that the culture actually functions. That's the problem here, is that nothing really functions. It is just a costume. It is just something that you do on Saturday, and then the other 6 days out of the week you're living just your regular American life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's nothing really transformative there. Not in like a total sense, but like the most that you'll get from the spiritualist crowd are, your good Samaritans and shit.
Yeah, they become volunteers.
Yeah.
And, well, I would say that like it does matter though. Like it really does matter. But it doesn't. It matters in different ways. And the one positive argument I will always make around authenticity is really goes to the crux of how this stuff plays out and how it starts. Is there are people that I can't deny that they're suffering. That they feel an absence in their life about who they are, where they come from, and place in the world, right? And that could be as grandiose as a cosmic, religious, spiritual vision to at the microscopic level of just their home. How do they fit into their family, right? And those people, when that door opens to start to see themselves within a given culture, whatever it may be. And I don't mean appropriation. I'm talking about something that's actually they're from. They just have been alienated from it. That we have to actually nurture and support. The problem that comes in inevitably, those of us that have a better respect for those culture, for culture itself and how it actually, like you said, how it functions, and trying to preserve its function in a positive sense, are disassociated from those relationships. So instead, you have kind of parasitic people who become intermediaries and fucked up guides for young people. But it's mostly young people, though I've met some older people that kind of rediscover themselves as well in their journey into finding who they are, right? And how do we mediate that? Because then there's the flip side of it where authenticity becomes a weapon, right? Or a methodology by which someone works their way in or works their way around, and they just play off shit. Like they just, like fuck anyone. Like the most rudimentary example is like, oh, I have long hair, must be a native. Oh, I grew my long hair out. That's what I am. I'm this, and I'll just show up at your meeting and tell you I am this thing.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I brought that up was just like, okay, we take a look at, it's going to sound like we're beating up on the Chicano side of it, but whatever. So we look at the Chicano side, right? The indigenismo.
Mm-hmm.
Do we, is it better to just take that position of authenticity matters and this shit is all fake? Because it is all fake. Let's be real about it. Or do we try and save it and just get it functioning? What's more practical?
Well, I think some of it's contrived, but we also shouldn't be too delicate about this. I think we've been made to be overly sensitive, but we should have a legit discussion about Chicanos, Chicanismo, and Indigenismo. And the reason is very simple. Elsewhere on the continent, they actually have these discussions. They're just not called Chicanos. They're called either Ladinos or Mestizos, or in Canada, the most obvious example of it being the Métis. which is the mixed, right? And they actually categorize themselves as a separate but related people to the First Nations of Canada. And they're actually acknowledged institutionally in that way as well. They're seen as a distinct peoples. Here, they're so loaded by history and weird shit going in every direction. They don't know if they're Mexican, they don't know if they're American, they don't know if they're Californian, they don't know if they're native. If they are native, they're gonna just grab it off a tree. It seems like they don't even know where it's from, or they join these like really constructed, because that's what they are, quasi or pan native movement groups, like these Aztec groups, for example, the Aztec dance crews, and then they start buying into the quasi religion that's developed around it. And some of that stuff is real though. Like some of the stuff that they're engaging with is very authentic. It just may not be authentic to them. Like they shouldn't be there in the first place, or it's being misused. But then again, who the fuck am I to say what is or isn't legit? Because that's up to them to determine on the level. But my view is very simple: is you have legitimate people and legitimate sources for all this stuff. It's just not here. And if it is here, it has to be identified. You know, it isn't you just show up in some meeting with some feathers that you got at a Halloween store.
Mm. Okay.
But also, like, the other part is that I know I'm averse to the delicacy of the discussion, because I'm just tired, man. I'm tired of not dealing with real shit and instead having to dance around people's shit instead. You know, like,
Oh, I feel you. I definitely feel you. But again, my problem is that I don't have, and as far as my community is concerned, the position to really fucking say anything about it.
you get iced out of the conversation by the simple, well, you're not one of us type.
No, it's just not my place. Like, I'm not gonna go like in some church or whatever, or some fucking phono and just start telling people that they need to live a different way.
It's real shit. Yeah. So then maybe the answer is just focusing within our immediate spheres, little by little, creating the circles around us.
Maybe I was also asking too, because like the Samoan community is also experiencing like a cultural revitalization phase in here and New Zealand. Obviously not on the islands themselves because they don't need it, but in the Samoan diaspora, it's pretty big. But there's no one really attacking the Christian side of it. Like the Christian side is untouchable. And it becomes part of really the curriculum. You know, they maintain that, yeah, you know, Samoa is a Christian nation, blah, 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 blah. But culturally, we're Samoan as fuck. Like, there's shit that we do that other people don't do. There's a way of life that has been maintained. Mm-hmm. So much so, and we talked about this last time too, so much so that kind of just assume that everybody's been brought up that way, even though they haven't. But going forward, you know, the Christianity shit is a problem and it needs to be dealt with. But do we take the self-righteous position that all the shit that has anything to do with Christianity is false and throw it all away and alienate ourselves? Or do we try and just, I don't know, break it down from within?
I think you have to confront it where it's at and move forward, because the rejection, I've seen the rejection shit. Rejection doesn't work, or it only works for a select few people, right? Because I mean, on a real tip, like let's just give a basic example. You know, we're both of us have been around hood shit our whole lives, and I mean, hell of people from the hood, all of them claim to be religious. but they do so much dirt that has nothing to do with their religion. You know, so clearly, whatever it is faithful or spiritual base is failing them in some regard in terms of making them come correct in the world, right? So they're already falling through the cracks. So there's already a body of people that are falling through the cracks. Then there's those that never question anything. Like I wouldn't even imagine in my own situation. My grandmother, was as Catholic as could possibly be, and but also I could see that there was no point in getting into that discussion with her. But having said that, she would have entertained the discussion respectfully. She would have been very curious as to what her grandson thinks, and having and exploring that conversation. It probably wouldn't have changed her opinion at all, but it would have been she was so grounded that she had no fear of a discussion, right?
Yeah.
Um, but some people don't have that. But those people can be key figures, Like my grandmother, she had a real unique way of socially intervening in a huge way. Like it really became apparent after she passed away how much of an effect she had in our town. And we come from a small, might as well be village town, if you will. And it turns out everybody looked at her as their grandmother because she just had that kind of a very approachable spirit and personality. So you could confide in them, you could ask real advice. And then so that when she was removed from the community, when she passed away, everyone's intimate relationships with her became more public. And so we all thought in our own family, like, well, it's our grandma. She deals with us, right? And then it became very apparent, like, oh no, she had this role that was community wide, and what she had been doing is she basically was slowly intervening and gently intervening in everyone's life in order to kind of foment goodness. That's really all it was, because she was very conflict averse. She was not into conflict at all. And I think that there's people like that in every community that are like center points. And if we can identify those, that's when we can actually start having these discussions in a way that isn't too disruptive, at least at the beginning, right? Because otherwise it's going to be confrontational, and
Yeah.
confrontational may not go anywhere, And this is coming from me. This comes from that spent majority of his life being confrontational. So like I'm saying that shit doesn't work all the time. Like that's for damn sure.
Yeah, it really doesn't. But yeah, I don't know. It's a little different with the Samoan community. Like I'm still not convinced. I just need to think about it a little more.
Well, I am curious about one thing. You mentioned something at the beginning, and this has been something we've talked around. Like we hadn't avoided it or anything, but various discussions we've had, it has come up on the periphery, which is how the Samoan community thrives, survives, functions within New Zealand, and as like a diasporic community that is not Maori, for example, right? And like to some degree, I'll use it as an example, is the Polynesian Panther Party in a way existed as a mechanism to differentiate that community from the general Maori community, even though the time period it's an inaccurate representation of the time period to some degree. But I'm just saying that it created a mechanism for moving socially that kind of transcended and also reinforced difference.
Yeah, I think that was more a Maori part as far as separating, but I don't know. That's a pretty complicated question. The only difference really is that Samoan people were a bigger fucking part of the population, though.
but they're able to.
Polynesians in general. After the Maori, it was the Polynesians, and we came in as workers under a failing economy.
So then, uh, let me ask. This is like, so then, because I've never been in those communities, so I don't know how they exist. But would you say that? So then, what developed in like Auckland and New Zealand was it like they just built a little Samoa, kind of like we have a Chinatown here, like an ethnic enclave, or is there?
Yeah, there's a little town in New Zealand called Ponsonby. That was a big Polynesian community. That's where the Polynesian Panthers came out of.
Mm. And Christchurch, right? Christchurch was it where it was? Christchurch or Whitechurch?
I believe so. May have been.
Nearby a city, I think. so
Yeah.
so then so it is aloof then. Because the reason I ask is because on one level we know that the Maori have made amazing gains in terms of cultural revitalization of their own, and at a national, transnational level, like and we could debate appropriation all day long, but the fact that of the matter is that the Maori have created a model within the public sphere in which education, cultural preservation, and transmission is growing within the New Zealand community, and so it's actually it's changing the typical old school colonial European form of New Zealand to something different. And what can we learn and take away from that to maybe accomplish some of the stuff that you're talking about, or has that occurred like in the communities there, amongst the Samoans or Polynesian communities? Are they actually looking at this going, oh, they do something like this, or are they rapidly becoming just Maoriized, for lack of a better term? I'm making up a term.
No, we're just on a very different timeline here. Someone started coming to New Zealand like post World War One, right? Coming in as laborers. Culture was strong, had a strong community in New Zealand. They became an antagonism to white New Zealanders after the economy started to crash, or when the economy crashed.
Ah,
That's when the racism started becoming more of a factor. That's when the Dawn raids happened, when they were, literally going to, literally going door to door, just checking visas at like some ungodly hour, like 4 o'clock in the morning and shit. And just, taking people, throwing them in a van, throwing them on a boat, send their ass back to the islands.
that's actually,
So,
that's actually scarily presentient and parallel to what's kind of going on here in the U.S. today.
yeah. So the Polynesian Panthers wasn't like a cultural thing. It was very much just a political thing.
A reaction to specific repression within a given moment in time.
Right. And once they fell, just like what happened here with the Panthers, the gang thing started becoming more of a factor. And then that's when culture starts getting lost. That's when people start assimilating more because now they're trying to get out of the gang life and be productive members of New Zealand society, and gave up, found out that they gave up a little bit too much, and now they're getting it back. That's kind of the same thing that's happening here.
Okay, so basically your question is actually happening all over Polynesia. Then it's just that it happens to be that moment in time where people
Yeah.
are asking these questions, and it's a good point. I mean, if I know you're not asking for advice, but if I was to offer advice, my advice is look at where we fucked up. Just don't do those things, because you can predict how they'll work for the most part, because God forbid, which might already be there, but God forbid you end up with Samoan tradition and or ceremony, if you want to, for lack of a better term, that has been totally Christianized. And I don't just mean they go to church on Sunday or in their like daily practice. I mean like kind of like what happens in the Aztec dance community. You have those that are strictly look at as an art form, like the dancing and the drumming. You have another one that actually believes they're like neo Aztecs, and you have another one that actually marries it to like weird Catholic stuff, and they all coexist, and they just serve to confuse the fuck out of people, in my opinion. And in general fail at what they're supposedly there to exist for.
Mm. Mm. Let's I got a couple of things to say about that, but just to clarify, with the Samoan efforts going on right now, it's not so much of trying to find what we have lost. It is more of trying to find value in what we have and what we grew up with.
Oh, okay.
So that we're not abandoning them. The problem, the thing that always frustrates me is the way that, Christianity is so merged. And it definitely is merged with Samoan culture. It didn't overtake it. It intertwined itself with it.
Which, from what you described to me, that is traditional Samoan culture was always kind of that way when it came to religion.
Right. Right. But a lot of the cultural mores and shit, it's finding value in that and understanding why it was actually that way. Because, like I was telling you before, I didn't have a lot of these things explained to me. I was just beat into it.
Oh.
So you have a lot of people abandoning things that they don't understand the meaning of. So it's just incorporating the meaning of it again. But also, like just, teaching people the language, certain etiquette during ceremonies that we don't really have often here.
Mm-hmm.
Like as far as a phono goes, a chief meeting and, how that goes and everything. Which is, that's the interesting thing about it. Is that one hand they're teaching us that Samoa is a Christian nation, and on the other hand they're teaching us Samoan etiquette. But as far as the Christianization thing goes, enough of that Samoan shit. As far as the Christianization of indigenous cultures go, that's always been a critique of mine, especially as an outsider being around these Chicano and these native ceremonies, these native spiritualists, is that I've never seen a difference between what was going on in church as far as the behavior goes.
Yeah, the same kind of like condemnation, shaming, power trip stuff.
Well, that and just the lack of principles behind it. As far as wait, hold on. Fucking unplug my headphones. But like, I was going back to what I was saying before, that weekend warrior shit, that I'm going to, pray on Saturday or Sunday, and, the rest of the week I'm going to just be a piece of shit.
Go home and do dirt.
Go home and do dirt, or just be, a regular, everyday, selfish asshole. Like, it wasn't producing people that were any different from any other average American that I've seen.
Well, I think
the only difference was the music they listened to and how they dressed.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Something you just said was very key in understanding the difference between where is going on in Samoan culture at the moment, or the Samoan community, I should say, at the moment, and what went on before. Which is what you said is going on is like they're looking at what we have now and trying to relativize it to some degree, right? Make it, how is it relevant today, and why is it of value to be, to preserve it? And I assume beyond that, how do we engage this actively into the present day, right?
Yes.
That is fundamentally different than all of the movements you just described, because all of the communities you described before were acting in defense, and more importantly, from the space of insecurity, because there's an underlying self-hatred. Because I never hear that. The only people I ever hear this value argument from, like where they see their culture as valuable, is those that emerge from it. And particularly in where it's legit and matters is from someone outside of the country. So an immigrant community, for example, be like, well, we're Mexican. And to be honest, they're so matter of fact about their existence that there isn't this crisis, right, of figuring it out. Whereas in the kind of the hyphenated American communities, what you get is actually them battling against an internal logic that makes them think that they're a piece of shit and the only thing that's valuable is being American. So, in other words, everything that they're trying to formulate is just uh, dressed up versions to look like themselves that functions in the same way as Americanism functions. A lot of analogies I use there in a row, but that's kind of the way I kind of see it. Like they're not looking to actually um, create authenticity. They're trying to create displacement, a relabeling of the same values that already have, but that they can preserve and say, see, fuck you, America. I have the same thing, as opposed to actually seeing what they actually possess. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. But yeah, I mean, I don't have the best words to describe it. All I can say is that I've been around a lot of natives and a lot of Chicanos who talk a good game about that indigenous shit. You know, they're always talking about their identity and their history and their culture. But I'm looking at them how they interact with the world, and I'm like, it's the same as what white people do, man. It's just, yeah. I don't have the best words to describe it, but
No, but that's exactly what I'm saying.
there's nothing different here.
But the interesting thing is that's a mental disorientation, like a difference in orientation from what you described the Samoan community is confronting, dealing with, and approaching things. That's totally different than the way all these other groups have been doing it for the most part, except for actual quote unquote immigrant groups, right? Um, and that's a huge difference. That's why you're having attention, because to be honest, your orientation is healthier for a wide variety of reasons, but that very notion is healthier and constitutive in the sense that it's building something versus destructive and always trying to reprove itself. Like it's still like trying to get well, I guess there's a phrase I'm always kind of semi fond of, which is it's like you're vying for Caesar's attention. Look at me, or like or you can look at it in the sense of a family dynamic. You have the little kid that's jumping up and down, making themselves like, look at me, daddy, look at me, daddy, look at me, daddy, look at me. Can't you see what I'm doing too? Can you see right here? And then you can flip it around and be like, see, fuck you, daddy, I could do it too. Right?
Yeah.
And like that's definitely not what you're doing. Like that's not at all, what the orientation you're coming from. And so that's huge. And just so you know, I'm going on and on a little bit too much about this, but it's actually a revelation to me as well to see that difference so clearly in this conversation, because I think the individuality thing makes insecurities, which is what this is rooted in, and kind of self shame, self oppression, uh, deeply personal. So in other words, it becomes individual. You don't see it as a collective thing.
Right. And again, that's the drum I've been beating for a while now, and I hope somebody out there hears it. Because that's what it really is. It all comes down to that, man. It's all individualist. It's all about me. It's all about the ego. It's all about what makes me feel better, what makes me feel unique and powerful. But there's nothing in that that's tying you to the other.
Yeah, there's no real obligation beyond the self.
Yeah, no real obligation. There's no sense of duty. No,
or even acknowledgement.
There's too much sense of self.
That's deep.
It's not about you. And not to say, because it really does sound like I'm beating up on the culture.
No, if you need a rubber stamp or someone rooted in the culture, you have one from me. And if we need to, I'll get some other people that can say, "Hey, no."
This isn't like, I'm not trying to disrespect it, and I'm definitely not saying that I haven't felt the power of a lot of these ceremonies, because I have been to these ceremonies, and you could feel that spirit. And I'm just saying that the only places where I've seen an actual like culture shift where you have to adjust the way you interact with people has been like on the res.
Yeah. I think that that's weird though too in certain ways because I think some of that's benign racism and it exists even within their own culture because I'm going to use a college term. They use that term Orientalism or exotification, exoticism, which is that this idea is they have a picture in their head of what a native is or what the reservation is. It's like it's idealized. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
in a way, some of the temperance, if you will, that goes in people when they go on to reservation, like you said, differently, has to do with that and nothing to do with actual respect, right? It's like respecting a fantasy image of something, because it's bizarre, somewhat. And I'm not saying it's totally that, but definitely that plays that work there, like as if every native on every corner in a reservation is some kind of mystic. It's like, no, man, no. Just no.
Well, I'm just saying that the res has its own culture. Like you have to adjust to it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It has, its own sense of self. There's it functions. It may not function the way we all would like it to,
Yeah.
but it functions in a certain way. That's different from everyday Americana.
That's real shit right there.
Just need to find a way to reorganize some things. Feel for the Native community, man. You guys got your work cut out for you. Not that we don't.
Yeah.
It's just a lot different.
In a weird way, that's kind of why I think in the political work I do, I focus on different things because I think that those are, I can see them. Does that make sense? Like I can see results, I can see outcomes, I can see them. They're in front of me. This stuff, so much more nebulous and like uh, fuzzy edged. That how do you confront it? What angle do you confront it? And it's ill defined, and it seemingly will never have resolutions. Like you can't really even measure gains. Like did we accomplish something? How do we move ahead? Type of stuff. At least that's my feeling. That's in a way that ironically since we brought up. That's exactly why I never did because there was elements going on there. Like there is too many moving parts here, and this is a mess. A mess I do not want to be in the middle of. Like because I just felt it was irresolvable in the state it was currently in at the time.
Yeah, the politics are crazy. I still think they need to abandon this whole BIA structure and go back to their traditional way of governing.
I agree with you. I mean, we've had I've done some presentations. I've had some of our folk have done presentations on exactly what the function of the BIA and tribal councils are, which is the council. For those in the audience that don't know, the tribal governments are not tribal governments. What they are U.S. governments imposed upon a tribe. So in actuality, though,
Fucking trustee board.
yeah, that's a very good analogy because in actuality, though a tribe may supposedly vote for their tribal council and their chief, quote unquote, or director or whatever they want to call it, um, or chairman,
President, chairman, all that stuff.
whatever it is, though they may vote on that person, in actuality, position and this function of that body is to not serve the interests of the tribe, but be an intermediary to the tribe at the behest of the U.S. government. And what the U.S. government did in terms of trickery was to say, oh, yeah, we only deal with those people. So, regardless of whether or not you have a traditional structure in place of leadership and everything else, it was saying, yeah, we're not dealing with those people. in some cases, and I don't know the full history of this, but in some cases there has to have been a lot of maneuvering within tribes, and there's definitely some today in attempts to do that too, where they're trying to consolidate positions in the tribe within the nation itself, a traditional position, as well as within the council, kind of like an overlap, right? But in but then it just becomes a matter of whoever's in that chair and the character of that person.
Yeah, the other thing is that it creates like this dichotomy between the traditional elders and these elected officials.
Yep.
And it's very destructive because now there's no authority over the tradition.
Mm-hmm. And all too often it devolves into like a really awful antagonism between them.
Yeah. Just all that at Standing Rock.
Yeah, absolutely. And then but that's a whole other question. That's a one we should definitely have a podcast on.
Well, I just came up with an idea.
What is tradition? I'd love to do a podcast on what is tradition, because that was used in a really intriguing way. You know, these vague terms. Well, the elder said this. Which elders? Who are you talking about? And tradition.
Right.
And I was like, okay, like, who the fuck are you? You know, like, and this is amongst their own. You know, this isn't even like dealing with outsiders. They deal with outsiders, it's that much worse. But sorry, I didn't mean to derail you.
But again, like that's people that haven't been brought up in a culture that functions, because there's follow-up questions. Which elder? Who's his elder? Where are they from?
Are they from here? Even?
Yeah.
Like, great, they're an elder. They're not from here. Like, these are the people that are going to live here to deal with the consequences that you're stirring up.
Right.
I want to hear your idea.
Oh, my idea, and we're going to wrap this up right now. My idea is that we make these discussions a series.
I'm tight with that. Get some more folk into the discussion too.
Yeah. So expect that, dear listeners. Series on culture.
Yep.
But way more than that. I'll figure out a better name later on. Like, facts, all this pressure fucking coming up with shit at the top of my head.
I got you. I guess on that note, we're gonna wrap this one up. And
yes, sir.
We'll come back hopefully soon, talking about some hip hop and some hood shit.
You got to come up with a sign out.
Like I said, we're gonna come back talking about some hip hop and some hood shit. So on that note, this is problematic, and you've been problematized.
Low out.
Tone out.
Shit.
Shall we do the entertainment right now, or you want to save it for tomorrow?
Was there even anything on entertainment?
There was a little bit. I kind of think we kind of discussed it last night. I would love to have we could do that discussion about Black Lightning, but that actually could be a show by itself. It doesn't have to be like a little.
Yeah, let's do that like a review show.
Yeah, because I like that discussion. That was a good discussion.
We could do that for all the fucking episodes.
And then the Glass trailer. I mean, what can you say? All you can say is it's dope. Yeah. I was like, oh shit, this is fucking awesome.
It looks like they always underestimate the mastermind.
Oh yeah, and his mom was the one saying it. I was like, oh hell yeah. That was fucking really dope. And then Titans, we really can only comment on the first episode, which I don't think is really enough to say anything about, because you and I came in the same discussion. It was like, well, we'll see what the next one looks like. They got enough out of me to see the next one.
Well, I put the Glass trailer, and then I don't know.
You can save that, or actually, what we could do is also, we could discuss Shyamalan and Glass, as well as Split and Unbreakable, in the context of like how much more sophisticated and or what the meaning of this is in this abundant superhero era, because I think it's far more nuanced. The shit he's doing is way more nuanced. Not just his character studies, but his everything in it. Like he said, he's actually doing some original shit versus rehash. That's how.
Yeah. Yeah, we could do that.
I like today's show, man. That was good. It was a little slow at the beginning, but that was all me with my imposed bullshit, I guess. The news stuff is just dry.
Yeah, I think it's better if we just do topics.
Yeah.
Because his new stuff is dry, no matter who does it. Even when I try and do it, it fucking sucks.
We bring in, like, unless the news happens to evoke a topic, like, naturally.
Yeah.
Then there's probably no reason to do it, except in the entertainment, it works better.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem to work that well. Here. Like, for example, if 9/11 happened, I'm sure we'd probably have some views on 11.
Yeah. Exactly.
I didn't hit stop, did I? My bad. Let me hit stop.